Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our evening session here on Friday. Um, this is a session where we're going to talk about, well, connecting with younger fans with a pretty hard album to connect with young fans, or potentially. Anyway, this is going to be an interesting talk, led by Kevin Farrell. Kevin Farrell is an associate professor of English at Radford University. His research focuses on the relationship between literature and popular music, with a particular emphasis on Irish modernism and Irish rock music. His work has appeared in the James Joyce Quarterly, the Journal of Popular Music Studies, and a new Hibernia Review. And recent projects include a study of spectral music in Marlon James's A Brief History of Seven Killings, forthcoming in the Journal of Historical Fictions, and a survey of popular music inspired by James Joyce, forthcoming in Lit Rock, a collection of essays to be published by Bloomsbury Press. So, Dr. Farrell, please take it away. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Chris, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. What I have planned for this session is a little bit less in the realm of a formal talk or a formal presentation, and hopefully a little bit more of a discussion. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit my personal experience with the album, my experience trying to introduce this album to my son Joshua, who is now 7 and was 6 at the time I first played it for him, and also to a lesser extent my son Oscar, who is 15 months and was just dancing to the album in the living room earlier today. So I think I'm making headway there. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I have some general thoughts and general questions that hopefully could springboard into a discussion that we could have together. I'd be interested in hearing your own thoughts about this topic, your own thoughts about the album. So if you have experiences about sharing this music with your own children or your students or your nieces or nephews or whomever, it is I'd very much be interested in hearing that as well. So to begin my part here, I'd like to start my part of the session with a quote from one of my favorite musicians, and not coincidentally, one of U2's favorite musicians, the late, great Lou Reed. Lou Reed once said, quote, "It's the music that keeps us all intact, keeps us from going crazy. You should have 2 radios in case one gets broken." That's a sentiment that I know I've felt really throughout my entire life, but particularly over the course of the last 18 months, when through the darkest days of the pandemic, music became something in my house that all of us were treating as a refuge away from normalcy, or the lack of normalcy, or from what was going on around us. I probably listened to more music in the last 18 months than I have at any other point in my life, which is really saying something for me. So along the way, two things kind of happened in my household. One, I found myself craving what you might call musical comfort food, albums that I had loved when I was a kid, albums that I had listened to as a teenager, or that brought me back to college or high school or wherever, that reminded me of people, old albums from the past that had always resonated with me. And the other thing is that I was doing all of that listening with my family, and doing a lot of that listening, particularly with my children. So they were being exposed to all of this music that I had been in love with, and I was playing it for them. Eventually, we kind of fell into a rhythm in my house where every day, every morning, I would take the kids, and my wife would go take a much needed nap, and I would play a record, and one of my favorite records. And my son started getting really into this, and it wasn't enough for him just to listen to it. He wanted to rate them on a Rolling Stone style 1 to 5 stars. Then he wanted to rank them in terms of favorites, and then favorite by each artist, and it basically became a game we were playing for months at a time. It was after my son showed that he was a big fan of the Beatles and a big fan of the Ramones, that I thought U2 was kind of the natural course of action. So one day, about a year ago, I played Achtung Baby for him, and he was crazy for it. It was a 5-star album, he said. He went through each individual track, and most of them, he said, were 5-star tracks. He wasn't so sure about Zoo Station at the beginning, but he started dancing by the time we got by the time we got to Even Better Than the Real Thing. By the time we got to Mysterious Ways, he was declaring that now U2 and the Beatles were in a fight for who was his favorite band, and Achtung Baby might just be his favorite album. So this response, obviously, I was delighted in this response, because there is something really very special about sharing something you love with someone you love, and that there's a real pleasure there, and something really exciting about that. But it also made me really curious about why the album resonated with him, and it made me kind of rethink why the album had resonated with me, and comparing his reaction to this record made me think about my first reaction to this record when I heard it for the first time. And I found that I just couldn't get enough of it. And I found myself listening to it obsessively in a way that I'd never really listened to music that way before. When I ask him about it, I get very vague answers. I think he, much like me, struggles a little bit to articulate what it is that we love about music, because sometimes that feels ineffable, or if not necessarily ineffable, then really, really hard to quantify. But he can go through and he'll say which songs he likes to dance to, and he'll tell me which songs he thinks sounds really good. He particularly loves the drumming on the album. Sometimes he really likes the guitar. Sometimes he thinks the vocals are what stand out. But I think the one thing, one of the things we really share in our relationship to this album, first of all, is the novelty of it. That I think both of us find that there's really very little out there that sounds like this record, and you can do its genealogy, and you can go through all the different things going on in the world of popular music and alternative music, and the sounds coming out of Manchester and alternative music and all of this. But I don't think you ever end up with anything that really sounds quite comparable to Achtung Baby. It's a record that I struggle to find good companion pieces for. And I certainly struggled to find it when I was 11 and the album first came out, and I think my son struggles to find it now at the age of 7. The other thing is almost kind of a counterintuitive thing, which I think goes back to Chris's point about how this maybe isn't an easy album for a kid to listen to. Contemporary reviews of this album, if you go back to positive ones, all noted that this album was deep, and that it was dense, and that it was dark, and that even when you get by some of the kind of poppier parts of the album, there's so much density and darkness to this record. I think both of us like to get lost in it. We like that it is an album that one can get lost in. That you can get lost in the sound, and you can get it sonically and lyrically. It's that kind of Dante-esque Selva Oscura, the dark woods, the place where you can kind of lose yourself. That there's something kind of fascinating about that. Which leads me, I think, to kind of some general points about the album. As I think about how to play it for kids, and how this album might outlive its era, how it has outlived its era, and how we might continue going back to it. The first thought I had is kind of one less about introducing it to kids for the sake of the kids, but more from the perspective of the adult doing the introducing. There's something kind of strange about this act of revisiting an album like Achtung Baby, because for those of us who love the album as kids, if we loved it as teenagers or as children, revisiting it is in some ways an act of nostalgia. And Achtung Baby is an album that's really, in many ways, resistant to nostalgia, perhaps even averse to nostalgia. Um, it's a forward-thinking album, and you two were pretty upfront with that. The whole chopping down the Joshua tree line, and Bono talking about disappearing to dream it all up again at the end of the Love Town tour. That the quote from Zoo Station, from which this session gets its name, the idea of everything being in motion, of time being in motion. It's not a backward-looking album in a lot of ways, which kind of makes the act of listening to it listening to it again, revisiting the album, rediscovering the album, an odd act, a counterintuitive act with the album. It makes some of the retrospectives that have popped up over the course of the week also feel a little unusual. The reissue, the 30th anniversary edition, and even really things like this, moments like this. For some of us, this really is a nostalgic thing. So nostalgia about an anti-nostalgic album feels like there's a kind of interesting dynamic there. Which leads me to a second question, where, if you'll pardon what might sound like a kind of trite word, I've been thinking a lot about how this album fits in time, how it fits in history, and starting to wonder if maybe this album is something we could actually describe as being timeless. And that sounds a little, maybe a little trite, but I was thinking the other day about a line that Jacques Derrida wrote in his book Spectres of Marx, where he says, a masterpiece always moves by definition in the manner of a ghost. And one unpacks Derrida at one's own peril, but part of it is that any kind of masterpiece troubles our notion of time, the same way a ghost troubles our notion of past and present. And I started thinking about whether or not Achtung Babies achieve that kind of status. And I think when listening to it with a kid, it's kind of inevitable, because so much of the context surrounding the album gets lost. Thinking about the historical and socio-political context that surrounded the recording of the album, everything from the AIDS crisis to the reunification of Germany, thinking about where the album fits in U2's overarching career. You lose a lot of the shock value putting on Achtung Baby out of context from the music that came before it, from this real shift from the Joshua Tree and from Rattle and Hum. It makes me wonder where it fits. Does it become one of those albums that now it's no longer simply a product of its time, but an album that kind of exists, borrow a phrase from one of U2's contemporaries, almost out of time? Final two thoughts here, and then I'd like to open things up. My final two thoughts. First deals with one of the difficulties of introducing this is dealing with some of the more challenging themes that one finds in the album, the darker themes, the more adult themes. I'll confess to having stumbled over trying to explain to my son what Even Better Than the Real Thing was about when he asked me. That some of these themes are kind of difficult, and then that's before you start talking about the notes of despair and the notes of adult relationships going bad. How to navigate those when playing them for a kid. And final one is the opposite, the light part of the album. That Achtung Baby is in some ways a very good way to talk about the themes that one finds throughout U2's music, including things like community and what we owe each other and how we can serve each other, and as Bono puts it, how to carry each other. That maybe this album is a good way to talk about ethical dimensions as well. So that's essentially what I have, my kind of meditations on listening to U2 with a 6-year-old. I'd like very much, I assume we have people here who maybe have similar experiences, and I'd welcome some conversation about that.
All right, everybody. Thank you, Kevin, for planting some seeds to think about here. Megan had her hand raised quite early, so Megan, would you care to chime in?
To be honest, I'm sort of on the other side. I am the daughter of a U2 fan. So I'm in the middle. I didn't really live through Achtung Baby. I remember it as a kid. I loved In the Serious Ways. I remember growing up with U2 in the 80s. My parents loved the 80s. And so I actually had this strange situation of going and jumping from pop to war because war was what I remembered as a child. And so and I know most people do not go from pop to war, but I have this strange feeling that 90s, I only caught on the end of it. But that my nostalgia is actually nostalgia for my childhood. And so I went to War, which was the album I played over and over as a 5-year-old. And even though I didn't understand all of the themes, the music, the energy of the music and the singer had me. And I connected on a 5-year-old level with those things. So I kind of find it strange. I sort of feel like I'm in the middle, not next generation. I was too young to really live through Achtung Baby in a meaningful way. I was only in elementary school. So I just wondered, like, not only is it, but so I remember the memories of my mom playing Joshua Tree and War with me and sharing those songs with me. And so I just think it's interesting that I sort of have it on the other side.
That's a fascinating perspective, Megan. I my parents weren't into U2, and I recall being liking U2's music a lot. Uh, Achtung Baby was one of my get me through high school albums, right? So every time I press play, it's a time machine. I'm back in my bedroom. I think exactly like I can see the posters on my wall, and the sheets on my bed, and I can remember what it felt like coming home after school when I was a sophomore in high school, etc. But when I play Achtung Baby with my kids, I'm not thinking about that. I'm actually thinking I'm super curious as to what my kids are thinking when they're listening to this, because I know what I think when I hear this album. It's my favorite album, so I think all of the things, right? My kids have heard U2 music their entire lives, and they actually they fight over which song they want me to sing them to go to sleep, and I think that's pretty cool. Do they understand all of the themes? No, of course not. They're 8 and 6, right? But I guess as a young child, the point isn't do you understand the album. I think a good starting point would be, what do you think it sounds like? Do you like the way it sounds? Period. Right? And I think because Achtung Baby is so sonically interesting, regardless of what the notes are, regardless of what the sounds actually are, it sounds interesting. And Kevin used the word dense, right? It is a dense album. There is a lot to hear. So I can totally see and understand how an album like Achtung Baby would be attractive to a 7-year-old's ears, because I mean, you press play on Zoo Station and that first guitar and drum come in, and that's a weird sound, but it's interesting, and it keeps going, and it keeps changing slightly, so a kid's interest is kept. I played Zoo Station on Thursday morning for my kids in the car on the way to school. We live about 4 minutes from their school, so it's a perfect distance. And I was like, kids, I haven't really played this one for you, so I'm going to play this one. And about halfway through, I looked in the back seat. I was like, what do you think? And they were just like, this is cool. And I was like, oh, yay. Good. Not that I expect my kids to absolutely love U2 like I do, but the fact that they said, this is just really, really cool sounding. That's all they said. But I think that's a great first step in trying to connect an album like this to ears that young. Anyone else?
If I can jump in, like you, my two kids have heard it from basically conception to the womb to coming out. And what I found was, when they were itty bitties, I would do more Original of the Species, stuff off of later albums. But for the Achtung Baby stuff, I had the ability, because of time, you had the Pickin' on You 2 album, you had the Royal Philharmonic album, you had the lullaby renditions. So I would sort of ease them in that way so that they didn't realize it. And then when I finally did play Achtung Baby, it kind of sounded a little familiar. But, at the ages that they were, they're not listening to the lyrics. They're not picking up on anything. It's not like, if I'm playing a B-side, I have to explain what figure of eight means, oh, it's an ice skating term. All of a sudden you get all this like parenting lying going on. Yeah, 6 and 9, that's a particular ice skating thing that you need to do. And, all that kind of thing. So I just picked up on the music, and the younger the child is, like in my case, because our adult ears can't hear the full frequencies like we used to when we were younger, I really love hearing what they have to say, because they're finding stuff in the music that I can't hear anymore because I've got old people hearing. So it's really interesting to pick up on what makes them dance, what makes them want to pick up a stuffed animal and do something with it. It's more musical than it is lyrical at that younger age. And in introducing it to them, they were reintroducing it to me. And it just built a better rapport. So now that I've, entrusted them with my music, now I'm learning from my daughter, all about Billie Eilish, and my son is teaching me all about Nintendo composers because he's really into video game music. That it opens up a conversation and a trust and a where that sound came from. Let's research it. And it also helps that you have Spotify, you have Google Music, you have so much more at your disposal than when we were kids, and we were lucky if we got to go to the record store or if our FM radio was going to play our favorite song. So with kids, there's just so many more opportunities. And neither kid has really asked me anything about the lyrics. It's just about the rhythm and the way that the guitar sounds. That's all.
Nothing about the lyrics? I'm outraged. Come on, Sherry.
Well, I mean,
they're
Where's your
12 and
parenting?
14. All my son listens to is instrumentals. So
where's
sorry,
your
my
parenting,
son's
Ian.
8
Sherry?
and my twins are 6, so they'll sing the lyrics, but they have they're just attracted to, does the beat make them bob their head? Does that guitar line sound interesting? Does that fat bass, hit them in their chest? And when it does, just the look on their face mirrors my look, and I get just the biggest thrill out of that. And Kevin, that you use the line musical comfort food, and that it's sharing what you love with those whom you love. And I think that's exactly what I've been doing with my kids, and it's the perfect turn of phrase for that, musical comfort food, especially through the past 18 months where things have been so crazy. We turn to that which gives us the most comfort, the most joy, and hopefully those we share that with will get some of that joy too. And so far in my house, it's been a positive experience.
Chris, as a college professor, how many of your students listened to U2 at a younger age?
Pretty small percentage, but those who did, they were usually children of U2 fans. I mean, not necessarily diehards like us who would get together on a Friday night for a U2 conference necessarily, but they have. But it's a pretty small percentage. Although I will say that the past couple days I've been playing tracks from Achtung Baby to celebrate the anniversary, and I walked into my class today, and 2 of my students had their AirPods in, and they were listening to either Achtung Baby or Songs of Innocence because I had told them about it. So, you know, never underestimate the power of influence here. So anyway, back to Young
Power of
Kids and
Apple.
Achtung Baby. Yes, Megan, go ahead.
Okay, I actually just a little side comment with Ian. I do remember being fascinated with the lyrics at 5. Come to think of it, I do remember playing Sunday Bloody Sunday over and over. I didn't really know what it was about, but I actually remember the lyrics being a draw. I'm an English teacher, so maybe that was something that was in me even at 5.
Oh yeah.
But so I was listening to the lyrics, and that was one reason why I love Sunday Bloody Sunday. I do remember being fascinated with them. Also, as far as Songs of Innocence goes, I taught in Taiwan at an international school and had a very small student body. And of my senior class, no, I actually did have one of my 20 seniors who was a U2 fan because of Songs of Innocence. He really liked about 5 of those songs.
I get the feeling that album and the way they released it to Apple products may have done them more good long run, even if it did them a lot of harm short run. It may have just been an earworm a lot more than may have been anticipated. But yeah, Boat the Blue Sky was that for me. Like I remember as a kid listening to that, and I mean, it was the lyrics and it was the guitars, and I would check the CD out from the library, and yeah, it was just fascinating.
Kevin, I'd be interested to know what your son says about the actual sounds. I mean, you said he started dancing, but what did he think about that super distorted guitar in Zoo Station, or Edge's guitar in Mysterious Ways that 8 tracks later brightens up?
I think he, much like I would have at his age, and even much like I did when I was a little older and discovered it. Describing music is always so difficult, particularly for those of us who maybe don't have the technical knowledge that music scholars do.
It's hard for us music scholars too, so don't feel bad.
Fair enough. I feel better now. He said something the other day. I was playing it for him just a day or two ago, kind of getting ready for this, and the way he put it was, "There's so much in it," which I thought was really pretty perfect. That you ask about what's going on, and he says, "There's just so much in it," and I think he's responding to the strangeness of the sound, but also just how many different sounds are going on. And if you compare it to some of the stuff that he hears elsewhere, the other things he listens to, the stuff he doesn't just get from me, but the stuff he gets from watching the Pete the Cat show on Amazon, or whatever other kids show he's really into. You don't hear those dense, rich sounds. So it really does sound like there's so much in it. And otherwise it really is whether or not you can dance to it. That's always the selling point for him.
Some kind of primal about that, but if a piece of music hits you in that way, then you are either consciously or subconsciously finding value in it.
Yeah, and I see it in my 15-month-old who's now started bobbing his head, and now it sometimes gets up and starts stomping around, which is his version of dancing, which I love, because it's such a it is that kind of primal and completely unselfconscious response to music, and it's something that I guess as adults you kind of it's harder to do. You're more self-conscious about it, or you need the right mood or the right venue. You're less likely to do it. It's kind of fun to see that very primal response.
Agreed. Totally agreed. Anyone else have questions or comments regarding connecting with younger fans, particularly with Achtung Baby? Well, if it weren't Achtung Baby, what album would it be?
So I've got two nieces, both under 10, and I have been trying to figure out how to indoctrinate them without their parents knowing. And so I have been strategizing. I'm thinking All That You Can't Leave Behind is probably the best. It's just got the most peppy songs and the best hooks and stuff like that. It's definitely their most poppy album. Um, but yeah, I've been strategizing about just like which songs I should play for them as like we're driving somewhere or I'm babysitting for them and the parents aren't home and oh what music can we play? I don't know. So yeah, if
You know what
if
you might
if you
try,
all
Ian,
have
is saying that it's terrible, or saying that your niece's parents love it or hate it. Saying that your niece's parents hate it, and then they'll be drawn to it. See,
to be fair, my
teenage.
brother does actually hate you too, just because of how much I played it as a
Well,
teenager.
there you
So
go. See, so
so that'd be an accurate description.
you
I
know
just
my. Oh yeah, please, Angela, go ahead.
I just had a memory of my nephew when he would have been like 2 or 3. I would say, I have something to play for you. And I'd take him over to the stereo and I would play the first, like the orchestral intro to Where the Streets Have No Name. He would lose interest once Bono started singing, but the whole intro, and I'm like just saying to him, oh, doesn't it sound like a sunrise or something? I'm like engaging his imagination as we're listening to it. And he wanted to hear that over and over. I really enjoyed that.
That's awesome. A sunrise. That's an apt description of the intro to Streets. You know, my kids got into U2 because I made for road trips and things. I made U2 mix CDs that my wife keeps in her car, and you know she had those CDs in she still has those CDs in her car, and so um, the kids know U2 from those mix CDs. So when they ask for track 7, it's not The Fly on Achtung Baby. It's track 7 on mix CD number 1, which I think is like Beautiful Day. It's something crazy. And so, you know, they just got exposed to it randomly, and I think just by sheer repetition, they're like, oh, okay, cool. This is all right. Maybe it's just repetition. I don't know.
Um, as a teacher, I've certainly been known to use YouTube in my lessons when I can get away with it. And one thing I've noticed is when I introduce them to the collaborations, because I've taught in a rural area and they really have a high opinion of Johnny Cash. So I have used collaborations sometimes and like, oh, who wrote these lyrics? So it's not going to make them huge fans, but it's a way of me sharing myself with my students and kind of connecting to who they are. So The Wanderer has been a pretty big hit, and it is a good one for lyric analysis as well.
I mentioned Kendrick Lamar's appearance on Songs of Experience, and that perks up they're like, really? I'm like, uh-huh. Go listen to it now and get back to me. They never do, but you know, one day maybe they will.
Yeah. Kendrick showing up on U2's album and Bono at least showing up on Kendrick's album. I still think about it every time I hear it. Just, I mean, it's something I still have to process.
It is kind of out of nowhere, but
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that was the point. But anyway, any other stories or comments or questions about connecting with younger fans, particularly through Achtung Baby?
I do have a question, which is, you know, how much of this do you think is related to our relationships with these younger fans, right? So like the experience is that you're sharing this with somebody who is close to you and they are feeling the closeness of your relationship as well as so I think it's a little different than like the random fan who gets Songs of Innocence on their Apple product and then goes, oh yeah, I think this is cool.
For me, it's the generational.
Sorry.
I was stuck listening to Bob Seger and the Beaver and all those, you know, 70s bands, the car radio was always on 50s music as I was growing up. So I kind of see it as my turn to introduce to the next generation, in my opinion, slightly better music, um, with the understanding that they will either completely dislike it and rebel and all that stuff. So I figure if they don't rebel over U2, then they're not going to run away from home. They're not going to rebel against me, at least. But I also feel like it's a fan obligation to ensure that the band has a pretty nice uh, generational group of people at a show, and that they genuinely want to be there, not that they're getting dragged there by their parents. So they don't have to do anything too embarrassing to try to get the younger generation. We'll take care of that for them, so their marketing department doesn't need to.
Kevin,
Like doing Sing 2 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was actually going to say something rather similar to what Sherry was saying. I didn't bond with my parents over music. Music wasn't something they were interested in. So personally, I found that elsewhere and found it with friends. There's no question that what I'm doing with my son is bonding. There's no question about that, and it's something we're doing to be close. It's one of the things gotten into as a way of sharing time together. But I do also think that if he didn't like the music, he'd tell me, because he doesn't hesitate when I play things he doesn't like. He likes the story I tell him, where one day I was singing a song and he just yelled at me when he was about 2. He went, "Stop singing that daddy song." So my son's a critic, and he would let me know. So as much as this is a bonding thing, the love of the music, I think, is very genuine.
You know, I have gotten less and less hesitant sharing my love of U2 with my with my students as explicitly as I do now. You know, when I first started teaching, it was like, yeah, I'm a U2 guy, whatever, yeah. But now it's just like I will come in. Like yesterday, I came in, I'm like, it's November 18th, it's the 30th anniversary, we're playing this song. No, we're playing this song, and we're gonna listen to this song because I love this, and I'm gonna share my love with you. And you don't have to love it, you don't even have to like it, but you need to know that your teacher loves this music, and this is why. I don't just say that I love it. I actually explain some of the reasons why, and sometimes they're lyrical reasons, sometimes it's musical reasons, sometimes it's just because this song reminds me of whatever, you know. But again, we're sharing what we are sharing what we love with people we're either close to, we want to get close to, or that we love already. So yeah, it's a bond. We're forming a sense of community, you know, regardless of how deep those other people get into the music of U2, you know. Of course we want to share something that we love. So yeah, Megan, please go ahead.
Well, again, I told you that my parents were fans in the 80s, but my dad became a fan again with me during the All You Can't Leave Behind. And actually, he went to my first U2 concert with my dad for Pop Mart. And then we saw that show together. And then we also saw a 2001 show of All You Can't Leave Behind. So I have 2 very treasured memories with him. We had a really difficult relationship, but U2 was the one place where we could meet, we could talk about things that really mattered. I shared my faith that he didn't share, but at least he knew where I was coming from. And so for all of the difficulties I had with him, it was super meaningful. And I actually used his music to say goodbye to him when he died in 2008. So for me, as a child of a U2 fan, U2, it was a huge bond between my dad and I. And it was a huge way that I was able to communicate with him, even through all of the things that separated us.
That was touching, Megan. Nice. Thank you for sharing.
Honestly, sounds like a bit like what Bono and his dad went through, where like his dad didn't really respect him until he actually went to a full U2 show and said, "You done well, son," or something like that. Yeah, no, generational bond. Chris, have you ever had open rebellion in the classroom against U2?
Not quite open rebellion, probably because they're afraid because I control their grade. But so even if they hate U2, they probably wouldn't come out and say it right away. But you know what though? Even if they did, even if U2 was like their Gates of Hell music, I encourage them to tell me that because I want them to feel free to share that. But one of my best friends in the world, he was one of my best men at my wedding, hates U2. He can't stand U2. And I tell my students this. I'm like, look, this is one of my best friends in the world, and he just cannot stand U2. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, but we're buds. We're best buds. So you don't have to like this music. I can't fathom why he doesn't like this music, and he can't fathom why I do like this music. And that's okay. That's all
Have,
right.
do you ever deploy U2 music as a tactical weapon against him?
I have.
Yes,
Yes.
I do the same
Playfully,
thing with
but
my
yes, I
brother.
have.
I do
Yes.
the same thing with
But
my brother. Just
you
like,
know, I also try to make a point when I use U2's music when I bring U2's music in class. It isn't always just to say, "Hey, look how cool I think it is." Most of the time, it's actually because the music is illustrating a concept that I'm teaching. So there's an educational and a pedagogical link to it, and as a bonus, they get to see their teacher absolutely nerd out.
he can sneak out while he's just listening to the
Yeah,
music.
yeah,
Yeah, he
exactly.
hasn't opened his eyes in 15 minutes.
But
Not
there's
far
also
off there
an
now.
element of like when you try to sneak vegetables into brownies or into something so that the kids will eat the vegetables. That's when you totally use the instrumental version of a song to play in the background when you're having like formal Thanksgiving dinner or something like that, where it's just incidental music. You blend in uh, the canon in D and some Beethoven, and then you weave in some All I Want Is You and all that stuff, so that it's just always there. Um, and they don't know why it's hitting their mind that I know I've heard the song before, but I think that it's part of the responsibility to try to sneak it in whenever we can.
My kids always say, "Hey, haven't we heard this before?" And I'm like, "Yes, I've played this for you countless times." Yeah, they it's so volume and repetition creates familiarity, and whether they like it or not, whether they're conscious of it or not, it's in there. So eventually, they'll actively recognize it, or at least I hope they will. Lots of time left. Anybody else sharing
I
experiences with
feel like I
October?
should share. Um, I'm currently a student in college, and
Sweet.
everybody, like every day, I wear a U2 shirt and talk about U2 in class, and everybody knows that I'm the U2 guy.
I've got a spot for
And
you in my classes. Come on down.
oh, I'd love to. My mom and I were talking about that from in the last session that it would be cool to come into your class. But I think like I've had students approach me and talk about, for instance, U2's appearance on Kendrick Lamar's record, and they were impressed by that, and I think it inspired them to seek out other U2 that I, and then they came to me to say, hey, what album should I go to next, or where should I go to from here? Um, and then I recently had a guy that I'm kind of forming a friendship with start asking me. He said, I'm really into like alternative rock. What album should I check out of U2's? And the first one that came to mind was Achtung Baby. And I thought it was a perfect stepping stone for him. And I am anxious to see after the Thanksgiving break if he actually listened to it or not, and to see what he has to say about it.
That's awesome. I really hope your new friend does listen to Octung Baby, and I'd be curious to see how alternative he thinks it is, quote unquote, alternative, whatever the.
Right, because that has such a nebulous meaning now.
Sure, sure, but that's it's a good point. I mean, both from a sonic perspective and also from a chronological and geographical perspective too. The whole alternative thing. Good call.
Conversely, I started chatting with someone on Reddit recently, and their username literally has U2 in it. And I asked him, "Oh, so you're a U2 fan?" And he's like, "What is U2?" Yeah.
Oh, it hurts.
There's definitely a gap forming. There's a gap forming.
Well, the boys are some of the elder statesmen of rock now.
Yeah.
So.
Bono is looking more and more like a grandma. So
Right.
I don't know if any of you have seen the YouTube videos, the reaction videos, where a lot of times it is younger people listen to a YouTube track. One of my favorites was the Slane Castle performance of "All I Want Is You" that segues into Streets, and invariably they always are like, "Wow, that is incredible." Whatever YouTube track, with or without you, is a popular one that they've listened to. I've seen on several. But always they always have good things to say about it after they've listened to it. And I think these are things that have been recommended to them by people who watch their videos, but they don't know anything about U2 from coming into it. Like, I don't know if this is a solo artist, if he's U2 just the singer, or is it a band? And they always talk about, of course, Bono's stage presence and his charisma and his voice, and but they also talk about Edge's guitar and what a great unique sound he has that he brings to it.
There's one in particular who has legit become a U2 fan through the experience, and she just keeps going back to U2, and it's absolutely delightful to watch. And it brings, I love watching them because it brings that feeling of hearing a song for the first time to me, just watching someone else's reaction to hearing the song for the first time. It's just a very joyful experience.
It is genuinely exciting to see these kids get into U2. It's really a thrill.
You know, especially with songs or albums that mean so much to us personally, right? Like, again, Achtung Baby is my favorite U2 record, partially because it was one of the get me through high school records. So I have a deep personal connection. And, you know, talking about lyrics, I listened to the lyrics when I was 12, 13, 14. I didn't understand most of them, but you know, some of the rhymes were cool, and I liked some of the turns of phrases. But now, as a father, seeing my kids get into tracks like like Until the End of the World, or you know, start singing the words to one, not necessarily understanding what that song is about, but singing the tune and singing the words, that it is a thrill. Because it's something that I love, and that interest is starting to form in someone else that I love, and that is thrilling. You're absolutely right about that. Oh, Lisa says she hasn't yet been able to convert her nieces to the fandom. It hurts her heart, and she has much work to do. Well, time is a train. It'll keep moving. You got time. All right, y'all. About 10-ish minutes left. Anybody else? Questions, comments, stories, sharing. Yes,
unrelated,
please.
but related. I was just listening to the U2 and Mary J. Blige version of one earlier today. I've been binging on Achtung Baby just because of this. And it never really clicked where at the end of the song, Bono and Mary both go into the same octave for singing one, and their voices become one. And I mean, I've always enjoyed that version of the song. I know a lot of people think it's not the best, but I've always enjoyed it. But it's just, yeah, sorry, just a little YouTube musing. Yeah, it just never clicked that their voices become one for 3 lines and then split apart again. But yeah, really cool song.
Well, if I may put on my analyst and interpretive hat for a little bit,
Do it.
their voices becoming one is very similar to, you know, sharing our love of U2 with somebody else, and that person's love of U2 starting to grow, and you can share an experience. It's one experience shared between or among people. Pretty good. Oh, yes, Lisa, please.
Um, you all have made me think of an experience that I had, not in introducing the music to someone, but introducing the live show. You two had not come to Indianapolis for close to 20 years, and they came with the Joshua Tree tour in 2017. And I had a crowd of friends that some of them came with me and some of them came on their own, and we all met up at a restaurant beforehand. A bunch of us did. So that the interest in the music was already there enough that they would come along for the show, right? Or they would get the tickets themselves. But I had more comments afterwards about the live experience. And they said, like, one of my friends said, "You didn't warn me that we were going to church." And they meant that as a really big compliment. And I saw another friend, the Anton Corbijn film work, take her breath away, literally, like she gasped. And it was really interesting how people found their way to the show. They were committed enough to the music, were game for a good time, right, to go. But how the communal experience that the band creates took it to a different level for them. And even if they were familiar with the music, it took them by surprise. I will always remember that.
You know, I'm looking forward to the day that I can take my kids to a U2 concert. I really am, because my first live U2 experience was very late in my U2 fandom. I was already in graduate school the first time I saw them. It was in Atlanta in 2005, or 5. It was late, but it was amazing. And I remember taking my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, to see 360 in Boston at Foxborough, and it was her first U2 experience. And after the show ended, her face was like this for about 20 minutes, just agape, because she just the sheer spectacle of it. You know, she likes U2, but isn't a hardcore fan, and she was amazed at the live experience, at the spectacle of it, at the community, that 100,000 people could be there to do that and have such a good time. And you know, it was amazing from where we were sitting, and she was like, this is wow, was her only experience. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to the day that I can hoist my son on my shoulders, right? And he can rock out with Streets, or when, you know, I'm really looking forward to sharing that live experience with my kids. Kevin, have you had a chance to do anything live with your kids?
No, I haven't. I mean, this really just started in the middle of the pandemic. So live music wasn't a thing, and obviously you two weren't on tour. I'm looking forward to kind of clinching it with that, because I agree with Lisa. It's the experience you get at the concert. It's hard to replicate that in your living room. And however great those the records are, and they really are great. That live experience is overwhelming. And you know, I've played the live tracks, and we've watched the videos, and we've done all that, but there really is no substitute. So I have promised my son that when they go on tour, we're getting tickets. Whatever they cost, however far we have to travel, we're going. So I expect to be held to that now. So hopefully soon, right? Hopefully soon.
We will make sure we can hook you up throughout the whole ticketing community so that you're able to do that. There's a good group of folks who watch out for one another. I brought both my son and my daughter in 2009 just to see the Claw. We weren't taking them to the show, but we lived close enough to Foxborough Stadium that we did a little day trip, and we let them at least see the claw to see where mommy and daddy were going to be spending a couple date nights. And been very fortunate with my daughter. We took her to IE, to J Tree, and to EI. And I would not take anybody that young to any other band's shows except for U2 because of the fandom. They really look out for one another. And so I felt like she would be safe. We would be able to cocoon her. She was up on daddy's shoulders in 2005, or rather in 2015. 2017, she fell asleep for half of the Joshua Tree. Woke up during, I think it was Ultraviolet. I made sure to wake her up for Ultraviolet for the messaging with that one. And then 2018, she was up for the whole thing and was totally stoked and all that stuff. But it is, as Lisa pointed out, it is that church communal experience. And for me, it let her better understand why mommy spends a lot of her time with these people and why she spends a lot of time wanting to be connected with this community, because it is such an awesome community and we all look out for one another. Would I want to do that, taking her to a different band? Probably not. But I would love to be able to bring my son, but he has a high functioning autism spectrum disorder and sensory issues and the loud music and all the lights and all that stuff. So he gets to see the videos, but he couldn't be bothered about going to the shows. But my daughter still asks, when are we going to go and see Mr. Bono again? I'm like, well, if you're lucky, I don't know, when they're 70, I don't know. I don't know when they're touring again, because they're not right now. So I said, you were a very lucky person to get as many shows as we did in that short amount of time. But yeah, if it's at all possible, I think 6 and older, you could probably get away with it, but I wouldn't go any younger than 6.
Sherry, you bring up a lovely point. I think that is a fine way to bring this session kind of to a close here. And when we're talking about listening or sharing our love of this band with younger generations, it yes, we want to share what we love, but I think it really does boil down to forming a bond with that other person through this album, through this music. And I have certainly felt that with my kids, and Kevin, you are too. And so it isn't just about sharing what we love. It's about forming a connection with some other person or some other group of people, like we are right here. And I think that's a pretty valuable lesson in the long run. So as we are approaching the end of the session, Kevin, do you have any last comments for us tonight?
No, I don't want to step on what you just said, because I think it summed it up very well. So just want to say thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed hearing your stories and your thoughts about this topic. So thank you for being here.